Okay, so let's make an important distinction. This might be one of the most crowning distinctions of this YouTube channel. What's the difference between a toxic person or toxic relationship and a narcissistic one? Or maybe the question is there a difference? Listen, once upon a time, and not long ago, but once upon a time, very, very, very few people talked about narcissism except people who had an academic or clinical interest in it, like I did. Then everybody started talking about narcissism, and now nobody seems to be understanding it. It's important we don't use the word where it doesn't apply, because when we use the word narcissism incorrectly, it's not doing anyone any favors. So the other day I was working on something. It was an exercise I was developing for other people, and I was doing it myself to ensure it made sense. And in the exercise, it requires a person to sort of hone in on the most impactful narcissistic relationships in their lives. And as I did this exercise myself to make sure that it sort of all worked, it was explained clearly, I recognized that there were more than just a few people in my life who I really did not like being in the presence of. I find them interpersonally icky. I sort of dreaded seeing them. I felt like they were a waste of time sometimes, and I avoided, but I felt it would be a bridge too far to call them narcissistic. Toxic, where I was concerned, definitely yes. Narcissistic, maybe not. So let's take this on. I come to your house. It's your birthday. I hand you a grocery bag. It's got a bag of flour in it, or it's just got a dozen eggs in it. What do? I imagine you look at me oddly. Maybe you wonder if it's a cultural thing. Maybe you ask me about it. But one thing you probably don't do is think that, oh, that's nice, Dr. RAMANI just gave me a cake. However, that's what we often do when we call people narcissistic. Maybe a person's just entitled. They do think they deserve special treatment. They're a jerk in restaurants. They have a whole call the manager vibe. They get gruff when they have to stand in line. It's embarrassing to be with them at those times, but it's just that. It's sort of an asshole vibe and a note to self of, ooh, definitely don't want to take a trip with this person kind of vibe. But they really actually aren't admiration seeking or validation seeking, and they aren't really grandiose except for maybe thinking that they shouldn't have to wait in the line. They do at times, a lot of times, have empathy. And maybe it's true emotional empathy, except for that poor waiter that they're yelling at, I suppose. But again, it's just this kind of almost privileged entitlement. Is that a narcissist? Personally, I would say no. But someone who only had a snapshot of seeing them in that restaurant would be tempted to say, I bet that person's narcissistic. If you know them, you may say, yeah, they're a bit toxic, but it's the bag of flour. It's just the dozen eggs. It may not be the whole cake. The traits that encompass narcissism are a person who has low, inconsistent empathy, grandiosity, entitlement, arrogance. They're very superficial. They have an excessive need for admiration and validation and praise. They envy other people, or they believe other people envy them. They're pathologically selfish. That's pretty much the cake. And you can't leave any of the ingredients out. You need them all to call it narcissism. These traits show up as manipulation, gaslighting, being dismissive, minimizing other people, having contempt for them, betraying people, belittling them, shifting blame, being angry, rage, having poor frustration tolerance, passive aggression, being controlling, a need for power. They lie, they future fake. The traits, the lack of empathy and all the rest of it, drive the behavior. The thing that motivates them is their need for control, power, domination, something to offset their insecurity and shame. It's a big cake. And you need all the ingredients. And yes, there are different kinds of narcissism, just like there's different kinds of cake. But the base is the same. The vulnerable narcissist is more passively aggressive, sullen, and more socially anxious and sullen and sad and grumpy. The grandiose narcissist is more showy and charming and charismatic and attention-seeking. The malignant narcissist is more controlling and menacing and mean and kind of scary. The communal narcissist gets their validation through the sneaky back door of, look what a great, helpful, charitable person I am. Now take a picture of me being so nice. The self-righteous narcissist is seemingly ultra responsible, but also very judgmental. Does that make sense, right? So the types are like the frosting or the flavor, like chocolate or red velvet or whatever. The cake's the cake. One way to think of it is that all narcissistic people are toxic, but not all toxic people are narcissistic. What makes a person toxic then is what you might be wondering. A toxic person may make us uncomfortable by how they treat us or other people. They might feel a little dismissive at times. They may have crappy boundaries. They're demanding. When you're with them, you feel like you can never get it right with them, or they're fussy, or they get mad or sad, or they withdraw easily when they don't get their way. Toxic people are unkind. They may have strong beliefs and not listen to other people, so I guess very stubborn. They don't listen very well. But to be toxic, you don't need to be all of these things, because toxic is subjective. One person may find a tech bro type who brags and drinks kale smoothies and wakes up at 4 a.m. to meditate and meet with their guru and blabs on about living to be 180 years old and is snobby about other people's lifestyle as being so unhealthy. Someone else may find them admirable. That tech bro may actually be nice enough to lots of people, probably their guru, but they may just be super rigid about their sort of kale meditation schedule and really believe that they're going to live forever and sneers at you for having a bagel. But they also may not be manipulative or future fake or gaslight. They may just want things the way they want them and organize their lives in a way that allows that. For example, they don't have a partner, no kids, so no one's really being hurt by their 4 a.m. wake-ups and chanting with the guru. And they're aware and know that a partner wouldn't fit in their life or kids wouldn't. And someone else may not see them as toxic at all. They might even see them as aspirational. One person may find a busybody mother who has an alphabetized refrigerator and makes her kids bento boxes for lunch and is up to her ears in the PTA of it all and looks a little sideways at the moms who aren't involved and insists that little Johnny takes violin lessons and do karate and take animation classes and judges the moms who give their kids sugar. Now, a lot of people might look at her as a pain in the ass. And you pray she doesn't want to talk when you run into her with your store-bought cupcakes. But yeah, she might actually be a little empathic, and you've seen her be empathic. Toxic, sure. Narcissistic, probably not. Toxic is subjective. Some things bother us based on our histories, our families of origin, our experiences in the world, our beliefs, and our own quirks. And yes, some people may find our quirks toxic. I have no doubt that every single person in the planet has at least one other person who finds them toxic in some way. It may be very unlikely with some folks, but even when I think of the sweetest of the sweet people I know, I also know of at least one person who finds them toxic. That's just how people work. In general, we find people toxic when we perceive and experience that we cannot fully be ourselves with them, and not only have to feel as though we have to modify ourselves in different ways, but that other person has no interest in seeing our whole selves. And if we show up as our whole selves, they will either not see all of us or they'll have a problem with it. So we might feel a little less than comfortable when we are with them. And that discomfort, that sort of unsettledness, is what may make a person feel toxic to us. And the toxic part comes when we don't see a path forward with them. I know people personally who are racist and classist and every other kind of ist you can think of. I find them toxic for how offhandedly they can share those really dismissive beliefs. However, I also know that there are people in their midst who will tell me, Ramani, really, they do have a heart of gold. They did this for this neighbor and that for the other person. And they did do those things. And frankly, they may even seem like a decent person. They may even seem like a decent person, certainly to those people they helped, right? Maybe even to strangers, until this other topic, and then I feel sick. To me, my personal definition of toxic, that feels toxic because I feel sick in their presence when they're saying that stuff. So no matter how many driveways they shovel for free and how many dinners they walk across the street to someone and how sweet they are to their grandchildren, I don't care. That feels toxic to me. Others don't see them that way. That's why this experience of toxicness is tricky. I have heard people call people who have these different beliefs from them toxic. People they find to be very judgmental as toxic. People they feel they have to be ultra careful around and choose every word precisely, or the other person will be judgmental as toxic. People they have to walk on eggshells around as toxic. People who are very competitive with them as toxic. People who are overly theatrical and dramatic in their gestures and storytelling as toxic. People who write mean comments on social media as toxic. And people who are very snobby as toxic. Listen, you can drop in the comments the stuff that makes someone toxic to you. It's not going to be the same for everyone, or if you even agree. And as I went through, and I did, as thinking about this video, I went through my phone, like, the contacts in your phone. And I stopped on the names of the people I kind of consider toxic. And it always came down to the same thing with me as I saw these names. People where I feel a little bit of a clenching in my gut because I have to be so damn careful about what I say, or I sort of feel like, I don't know, breathlessness, I guess, because I know they're going to say some kind of mean little zinger about me or someone I care about. People where they say things about groups of people that are dismissive, intolerant, and ignorant. People who are abrupt and sort of interpersonally cold. People where I just feel that I have to be so very, 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 very careful around. I also had to recognize that some of these patterns that I was experiencing as toxic may be cultural, especially the abruptness. Okay, but it doesn't mean I like it. Ultimately, the sensation of toxic may be just that, a sensation, something we hold in an embodied way that reflects our preferences, our histories. And maybe the better way to approach it is not even that this is a toxic person. That's a bit of an indictment. But these are really toxic patterns for me, and may not necessarily be someone you would work well with or want to spend your precious leisure time with. Toxic things make us sick. And these interactions can have that sensation of like, ooh, I kind of feel sick after I spend time with this person. We're living in divided times, no matter what, everyone can agree on that, ironically. And language matters. Many of us can navigate toxic relationships without feeling that we are being psychologically torn apart the way we do when we're in a narcissistic relationship. Narcissistic relationships have much more far-reaching effects. In toxic relationships, the interactions may be unpleasant, but in the macro, we might sort of roll our eyes and say, ugh, all right, they'll be there, and we grit our teeth and we get through them, but it may not get under our skin the same way. We may not feel confused or crazy or dumb or as though it's our fault in every toxic relationship. Now, when the toxic behavior or relationship is narcissistic, then you're going to feel those things. But before you call someone or a relationship or behavior narcissistic, really pull it apart. Look at the ingredients. Don't call the eggs a cake. Figure out if it's all there. Because narcissistic relationships really do a number on you. Folks, we're going into the lovely holiday season, and you know the difference. The toxic family member may be the one where you sort of laugh it off or internally roll your eyes or recognize, once again, I'm going to get a gift that I have no use for, or may not want to have a long conversation with. But you understand them and you know what you're getting with them, and you don't feel, I guess, triggered per se. The narcissistic folks, you feel them more deeply, and that feeling lasts and it destabilizes you. There's a difference. Healing from toxicity, when it's not about narcissism, doesn't even feel like healing. It feels like Sort of like, ugh, here we go again. The idea that toxic people may not manipulate or do those things that are part of the narcissistic power play can help you see the difference. So-called toxic folks, I mean more people doing toxic behaviors, are just sort of living their lives and doing their thing, and the way they do those things just may not work for you. We don't have the luxury of lifting up the hood on a person and peering in. A person whose behavior is toxic, who is not narcissistic, may not have the same demons of insecurity and shame that a garden variety toxic or difficult person has. And without that knowledge, some people, they're just a handful, but it's not a big psychological storm inside them. Those are often the toxic folks who are not narcissistic. I use the example of someone who's cold and abrupt. Listen, let's say it's a high-stakes day. For example, you're very sick, and the doctor is abrupt and sort of cold. Even if they are a great doctor, that response may feel really toxic that day. But it may also be sort of cultural, it may be how they work, and it's not because that doctor has unresolved insecurities. On another day, if you met that doctor, maybe not as a doctor, but maybe you met them socially at a friend's house, you may still think they're a bit of a dick, but you also may find that they have dry humor. Context matters too. And one last way to think about this. You and a friend you adore, just love this friend. You both know a third person, and your friend loves this third person, loves spending time with them, but you feel sick when you spend time with this third person for your reasons. And so it becomes something that you and the adored friend just sort of dance around. The adored friend spends time with that third person that you find toxic on their own. Clearly, your friend doesn't see that person as toxic, and they're not having that experience with them. Every human being is a stimulus and a response. And you can actually kind of also see why your friend likes them and why you don't. And you and this friend you adore will never agree on the idea that this third person is toxic because it's subjective. Narcissism isn't so subjective. It is much more a definable personality style based on an accumulation of looking at a person's behavior. I'm the first to tell you it feels like an insult to be called toxic or to call someone toxic, and I get that. But focus on the subjectivity part. Narcissism isn't subjective, and when all those traits line up, it is not good for anyone. Not their families, not their spouses or partners, not their colleagues or employees or friends or neighbors or communities or anything that they're in charge of. Toxic people or people with toxic behavior who are not narcissistic may be annoying, even upsetting at times, but maybe not as universally harmful. And we will never all agree on whether they are toxic or not. And the tricky part, we may love these toxic people. It may be your adult child, and maybe an old friend from way back. It may be a sibling. You can even see how they've burned bridges with other people. But you know them, you get them. And it's not, and the experience you have with them, it's not that dismantling experience we have when we're with someone narcissistic. And if you've had both kinds of relationships in your life, a narcissistic relationship with a narcissistic person, a person who's a lot more toxic, you know the difference. And you may feel quite guilty for viewing them as being somewhat toxic because you figured out so many workarounds with some of the toxic folks in your life. Words matter, folks, and narcissism's a very useful word when we use it correctly. Toxic is a tricky word, but stick to it being subjective, your experience. It may not be someone else's. And unlike narcissism, frankly, I do believe toxicity can shift a little bit. You may even be able to have a conversation with a person whose behavior feels toxic and find that there is a shift. You may still not love spending time with them, but there might be a time when they're not as defensive or anger or blame shifty. If you were to even bring up like, oh, that thing you did, I wasn't cool with that. They may even say, hey, you know what? I am who I am, and thanks for sharing. And then, folks, the ball's in your court. And that feels very different. Someone saying, yeah, okay, got it. I'll cop to that. That feels very different than someone gaslighting you. So again, going back to the examples I gave, even of our tech bro friend, listen, is him getting up early and meditating and criticizing your bagel and all that, is that toxic? Again, it's very subjective. Someone else might say that's just who he is. Why is that bothering you? And you have your reasons for it. But I think the big challenge here is that we've gotten so lost in narcissism and toxicity being synonymous. Remember, all narcissism is toxic. It's not good for us. But this idea that there are people in our lives where we don't like spending time with them and we consider it time served and we tolerate it because we've got to see them at the Wednesday staff meeting, or we've just got it, we need to count on them to get things done. But when we break it down, we're like, oh, they're not narcissistic, but why are they getting to me? Because it's not Groundhog Day, folks. We're not starting as a blank slate every day. We're an accumulation, a snowball rolling down the hill, gathering more and more stuff and experience and all that. And those are going to affect how we interact with the world. And also, like I said, that painful recognition that someone, I can promise you, that someone out there in the world thinks you're toxic. And that's based on some of the behaviors you engage in that are very much you and their experiences in the world. But then it's very different because after spending time with someone who may be somewhat toxic but not narcissistic, again, it's a bit of an eye roll and thinking, I don't need to do that again for a month. But you definitely don't spend the next week ruminating and wondering and feeling like, oh my gosh, like I can't even get my head around this. That's not what this is. It's, again, toxicity is really based on a subjective experience we have with someone. There ain't nothing objective about it, which is why you and your best friend may simply not agree on whether or not someone's toxic. Hope that distinction's helpful, and thanks again.